Okay, Mr. President, you're all set. Oh, sorry. Oops. Hold on. Sorry about that, Paul. You're now all set.
We're good?
Good.
Look at that Montreal Expos hat, Bob. Whoa, Christopher. Nice. Nice work on that. Can everybody hear me? Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. Okay. 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 All right. All the comedians are on board, so here we go. Okay, everybody, welcome. It's a special day today. I want to wish everybody a very happy pitchers and catchers reporting day. It's, you know, God is still in heaven, and pitchers and catchers are in are reporting to camp. I was reading our local guys got tested for COVID yesterday. They're having their physicals tomorrow, and if all goes well, first workout for pitchers and catchers in Scottsdale, Arizona, will be tomorrow. So blessings and good wishes for that, for the game, which we love. Couple of announcements before we get to our guest today. Our guest is Dan Taylor, who is about to publish a book that's coming out next month, I believe, Dan?
Correct.
And Dan is I will let him largely do his own bio and preview into that, but he is a longtime broadcaster out in Fresno, California. A couple of household things before we get going here. You may have all seen an email that came out today from National in Phoenix that the SABR National Convention scheduled for Baltimore, Maryland, which was supposed to be in the summer of 2020 and was postponed until the summer of 2021, has now been postponed again until the summer of 2022. So it's still going to be in Baltimore. They in the email, they have specific dates for that. And the same thing applies to, for those of you who take part in it, the Jerry Malloy Conference. And that is down in Alabama, I believe, Birmingham, Alabama. And that also has been postponed for another year. So we continue to do battle with the virus, and we do the best we can. I hope some of you are getting vaccinated. I just missed the cut for me. I'm just too damn young. I missed the cut by 1 year. And, but sooner or later, we're going to get there, and we'll all get vaccinated, I hope, and things will be much better soon. Now, you also saw people who are SABR members, Rocky Mountain SABR members. We should have received an email inviting you to participate in our annual Predict the Number of Rockies Wins, and also a separate contest of predicting this year's World Series winner. So in the past, we have, the winner has usually won Rocky Mountain SABR pencils. So, you know, a very high honor, but not a lot. Dan, no faces now, Dan Evans. So we decided to make it a little more interesting, and we've switched from pencils to cold hard cash. So there's $100 purse for each, predicting each one. In the event of ties, the winners will split the pot. But it's so far been quite well received. We already have 14 entries in the Rockies predict win and 9 in the World Series win. So I would encourage you all to join in. All you have to do is email me with your predictions, and I'll email you back a confirmation. And it costs nothing to enter other than your membership in good standing in Rocky Mountain SABR. Okay. Also, I would like to, before we begin, I'd like to say a special hello to Marlene. Where'd she go? I can't. Oh, there you are. Marlene Vogelsang. That's Marlene is the president of the Lefty O'Doul chapter that represents San Francisco and Oakland. And she and I are convention buddies. We frequently get at least 1 or 2 meals in at every convention. And we're going to have to wait on that till 2022 now. What are you going to do? But I just wanted to welcome her to our program today. Okay, now I'd like to turn it over to our guest for today, our special guest. And Dan and I have already had one very nice conversation. It largely centered on baseball, strangely enough. And but here he is. Let's please welcome Mr. Dan Taylor.
Paul, thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation, and Alex for facilitating things. And
of course,
it's a huge treat to be able to. It's as big a treat to be able to talk about the Hollywood stars as it was for me to be able to research and write this book coming out, Lights, Camera, Fastball: How the Hollywood Stars Changed Baseball, which will be out next month. And that's because I think the Hollywood stars hold a very special place in baseball history. I think every author gets asked at some point what led them down the path to that particular project. And for me, it was my great friendship with the legendary scout George Genovese. I was very fortunate to be able to write his autobiography a few years ago. We became great friends through the project. And George loved to talk about his 2 seasons with Hollywood. And if we were at a game at Dodger Stadium, he would point out things that were taking place that he said actually originated with the Hollywood stars. And I didn't know that part of their history. And one of George's closest friends, another person who worked in the Dodger scouting department, a guy named Artie Harris, who was Scout Artie in the movie Moneyball, he grew up about 3 or 4 streets over from the Stars ballpark. And so Artie put a lot of things into context, made a lot of introductions to others who grew up in the proximity of the stars. And next thing I knew, I was, knee deep in this project, and what a fun project it was. I think we all have the lasting legacy of the Hollywood stars on our minds is they were the team of the movie stars, the Hollywood stars for the Hollywood stars. And that's true. I mean, every night you had the biggest names in the entertainment business in the box seats there at Gilmore Field. Bing Crosby, Jimmy Stewart, George Raft, Mickey Rooney, Clark Gable. They were there every single night, according to former players. But they were more than just ticket buying fans. They were involved. 20 or so entertainment superstars were in the ownership group, the original ownership group. If you attended a game on bat day, your bat could be handed to you as you came through the turnstiles by Bing Crosby or Barbara Stanwyck or Gary Cooper. They were very actively involved. And of course, I think one of the things that players, when they joined the Hollywood stars, were really startled to find out was that these huge movie stars were as big a fans of them as they were of the movie stars. And Jimmy Stewart and his wife often invited players into their home for dinner. Chuck Stevens and his wife shared stories of dinners in the Stewart home. Players dated some of the starlets. Bing Crosby would go golfing with players. So there was a great fondness, a great connection with the Hollywood players and some of these big movie stars. And it also led to opportunities in the motion picture industry for a lot of players. You look at most baseball movies through the 40s and 50s, and the extras are players from the Hollywood stars, everything from the Stratton story to the Jackie Robinson story. You look at the Lou Gehrig film, Pride of the Yankees. There was a false story floated, I think, on the MLB network a few years ago by Kevin Costner, that they flipped the film of Gary Cooper, who was a natural right-handed hitter. And that was not true. They actually used Babe Herman of the Hollywood stars to hit, and they shot it from kind of long range so you wouldn't be able to tell that it was Babe Herman. Irv Noren shared a story that the players kind of figured out how the industry worked, and they were paid by the day. And the last day of this particular film that a lot of the Hollywood stars were extras in, it called for Noren, who was playing in center field, to make a throw to third base. And it was going to be the final scene shot that day and the final scene that they were going to be involved with. Well, Irv Noren quick thinker that he was, he airmailed the throw high over the third baseman's head. So they all had to come back the next day and shoot it again and get one more day's pay. So the players, it was a very special and unique environment for them to be a part of. But I think all of this has overshadowed what really the true legacy of the Hollywood Stars is. And that's just one of the most innovative and pioneering teams in baseball history. March 30th, 1940, they became the first minor league team, the first team outside of New York City to televise a game. They televised their season opener, and there were only 300 sets in Los Angeles at that time. But the response was so huge in that context that they televised a number of additional games that season. And again, in 41, it went on hiatus when the war broke out. But they jumped back into it after the war and had several seasons where they televised every single home game. They were the first team to fly. Well, minor league clubs, even big league clubs, were traveling by either buses, station wagons, or trains. The Hollywood Stars were not only flying up to the Pacific Northwest or the San Francisco, Oakland Bay area, they were flying by charter. So it wasn't just pay the reason a lot of players balked at leaving the Hollywood Stars or the LA Angels to go to the big leagues. And particularly with Hollywood, it was the lifestyle, it was the environment. Art Shalak was a left-handed pitcher on their 49 championship team, and he shared the story with me that his wife really became captivated by rubbing elbows on a nightly basis with the movie stars. And when the Yankees bought Art's contract, Fred Haney, the manager, wanted to tip off Art's wife during a game that this had happened and that she needed to go home and get packed and prepare for a move. And she came down into the office, and between innings, Haney ducked in and broke the news to her that her husband had just been sold to the Yankees. And Art said she shrieked, "Who the hell are the New York Yankees? I am not leaving this place." So they came to really enjoy their time there immensely. But they were a pioneering team, and it really emanated from the top. A man who has probably touched many of your lives and you don't even realize it, a man named Bob Cobb. And Bob Cobb was the owner and operator of the most famous restaurant in the world, the Brown Derby in Hollywood. And in November of 1938, the Hollywood Stars were in deep financial trouble, so deep that during the season, when their equipment trunks didn't make it to an away game and they had to forfeit, the Pacific Coast League fined them, and the team had to sell a player to raise the money to pay the fine. The owner was forced to sell at the end of the season, and Cobb pounced on the opportunity. And he put together a plan, reached out to a number of his movie star and director friends, and they put together this ownership group, and Bing Crosby and Cecil B. DeMille and Barbara Stanwyck, among others, were involved. And they raised $200,000. 40 of it went to buy the ball club. 50 of it was set aside to buy players. Babe Herman was one of the first that they bought, which brought them instant credibility in the Los Angeles market. And then $100,000 was set aside, and they partnered that with $100,000 from an oil man, Earl Gilmore, and they used Gilmore's land, and they built a 10,000-seat ballpark, Gilmore Field. And Bob Cobb brought the philosophies that he employed at his restaurant to the ball club. He knew that celebrities would never complain. They just wouldn't come back. And so he was a stickler for quality. In the stadium, he built a VIP lounge. This was 45 years before the Lakers had their celebrated VIP lounge during the Showtime years. They had a live band. They had a buffet, an open bar every night in this VIP lounge. The box seats were constructed in a very different manner than those in baseball. You can always tell a movie if it's been shot in Gilmore Field by the box seats, because they had sides and a backing, and they were patterned after the boxes at the Hollywood Park Racetrack and the Hollywood Bowl Entertainment Center. So he really went out of his way to cater to that celebrity crowd. But Cobb went much farther than that. He had frequently gone, before buying the Stars, he loved baseball. He would go to LA Angels games, and he was appalled by the quality of ballpark food. And so when he took over the Stars, he was a stickler for the kind of buns he wanted. They had to be real milk buns. His hot dogs had to be skinless Franks. The ice cream, he was a stickler for the fat content in the ice cream. And he really got into some heated arguments with his wife about it, who said, that he needed to watch his waistline and worry less about how much fat was in the ice cream. But he bumped heads with Danny Goodman, whom he had hired to run his concessions operation. And Goodman was looking at, the typical buy low, sell high. And that was not Cobb's thought. Cobb was all about quality. And there's lasting things that Cobb brought to the game that we see today. He created the Hollywood Stars created the California League. And I don't know if Rob Manfred still allows us to call it the California League, but the Hollywood Stars really took a big plunge into player development. They wanted to get away from the traditional minor league model of the day that you were buying big league guys near the end of their career. And he wanted to start developing talent that either they could keep and win with, or that he could sell. And one of the things they did, which was very interesting, that he and his business manager studied the agreement that Major League Baseball had with the National High School Federation that governs signing players. And the rule at that time was that you could not sign a player until 30 minutes after the conclusion of their high school graduation ceremony. Well, as Cobb and his business manager studied this, they realized that only covered big league clubs. It didn't cover minor league clubs. And knowing that by the time high school players got to their senior year, they were going to be competing with big league clubs to sign them, they started going after high school juniors, and it infuriated big league clubs. In fact, the LA Angels took their head scout, Dutch Ruther, the former big league pitcher, and had him go to all the high schools in Los Angeles and do assemblies, urging the high school players to ignore the Hollywood Stars and wait until they graduated and sign instead with either a big league club or with the Angels. But they got some very good young pitchers, and they had a process going that was going to pay dividends. And World War II came up, and each of these young players ended up getting drafted. They had signed the LA High School Player of the Year, a pitcher named Bill Barasoff, and his boys later played in the Dodger organization. But Bill Barasoff came home from the war with a shoulder injury and was released. They signed a young pitcher by the name of Clint Hufford, who also pitched in Denver. And Hufford fell off a ladder when he came home from the war and damaged his shoulder and wasn't able to play again. They signed one of the top high school athletes in LA, and Eddie Harrison, who was a tremendous football talent as well as baseball. And as a 17-year-old, he stepped right into the Hollywood lineup in left field. Off he went to the war. He came back and decided he just wanted to get on with life and move into business. So, and then when the war ended, Major League Baseball worked with the high school federation, and they closed that loophole. And so the Stars were not able to continue going after younger talent. I should also add, though, that in their quest for player development, in addition to creating the California League, which after the war, major league teams jumped on it, offered bigger dollars, and those teams ended up aligning with big league clubs, and that ended the Coast League's effort to use the California League as a development league. Cobb also started the Billings Mustangs in the Pioneer League. That's his adopted hometown. He was born in Missouri but raised in Billings, and he went back and created the Billings Mustangs, used kind of the same financial model that he'd used with the Stars, and would place a lot of the young players, would send a lot of their young signings up there. But they also made the club in Denver in 1948, their farm team, and sent a number of young players to Denver and had an option on being able to get first shot at Denver players. And that's where George Genovese signed from. He was having a big year in 48 with the Denver Bears, and Hollywood came in and needed a shortstop and signed him. And it wasn't a long association that the Stars had with Denver. I think the Bears, after the 47 season, had lost their affiliation with the Yankees, and they were looking for players, and they couldn't get a big league connection at that time. And Hollywood was all too happy to align with him. So the player development, and that's another area too, where Hollywood has gotten a little bit of criticism for being one of the last teams in the Pacific Coast League to integrate. And it's not true. They were the second. And maybe it's a technicality that I say that, but in November 47, John Ritchie signed with the San Diego Padres. He had played in the Negro League, but his family, they were legends in San Diego. And so the Padres integrated the Pacific Coast League in the 48 season. Hollywood, every year in January, would hold a big tryout camp at Sawtell Field, which is where UCLA now plays their home games. And there was an all-black club in the semi-pro leagues in Los Angeles. Semi-pro ball in the 40s and 50s was huge in Los Angeles. And there was an all-black club called Gold's Eagles. and their benefactor was the drummer in Count Basie's band. And they had a couple of players, and their coach called Hollywood's head scout, a guy named Rosie Gilhausen, who became a legendary scout, got his start with the Hollywood Stars. And the coach called Rosie and said, I got a couple of players that the St. Louis Browns seem to be interested in. And so Rosie brought him out to Sawtell for the tryout camp, and he signed this terrific power-hitting outfielder by the name of Eddie Moore. That was in January of '49. And they put him at Billings. He was the first African-American player to play in the Pioneer League. And he had 2 years in Billings. His second season was a big, big season. And that ended up being the year Hollywood had in '49 done a tie-up with the Brooklyn Dodgers for players. And when Branch Rickey left to go to Pittsburgh, Bob Cobb had become very close friends with Branch Rickey. And they broke their agreement with Brooklyn to follow Rickey to Pittsburgh. Well, Buzzy Bavasi, who had replaced Rickey running the Dodgers, he wanted compensation from Hollywood, and he wanted 8 players from Hollywood. And one of them, probably the biggest name, was Norm Sherry, who went on and played and managed in the big leagues. He had been signed by Rosie Gilhausen for Hollywood. And among the other players was Eddie Moore. And Eddie Moore got to St. Paul, one of the top Dodger farm teams. And I spoke with his roommate in the organization, and he told me that everybody felt Eddie was ticketed for big league greatness. He was the victim of a bad beaning, was really never the same. And he ended up playing several seasons in Mexico and finished with a year in the Pirates organization. But he was the first African-American that Hollywood signed. Now, the first to actually put on a Hollywood uniform and play for them was Roy Wellmaker in 1951, who they got in a trade from San Diego. But 2 other things that we see frequently in baseball today that came from Hollywood. One, in the 5th inning of every game, you see the grounds crew come out and re-groom the infield. That started with the Hollywood Stars. They had a pitcher in 1950, Jack Salveson. He was kind of at the end of the road, didn't have a lot left in the tank, and he felt he had to work fast, keep hitters off balance, and get through a game as quick as he could. He would tell his catcher, as soon as you release the ball to me, I want you back down in that crouch because it's coming right back at you. Well, this was a problem for the Hollywood Stars finances, because when he pitched, games were 20 to 30 minutes quicker than any other night. And they didn't make as much money at the concession stands when Jack Salveson pitched. And so early in the season, Cobb and his staff were racking their heads about what to do. And they came up with this idea to create a 10-minute intermission in the game to allow fans to go and get some food or drink. Well, the Coast League turned the idea down. Minor League Baseball turned the idea down. Ultimately, they came around mid-season and let them test it out. And by 1951, almost every team in the game was doing it, and it's been a staple of the game ever since. When Cobb started the club and they built Gilmore Field, he had a 20-year lease. And coming out of the war, he knew that, he had a few years that he really needed to start looking at other options for a ballpark. And coming out of the war, the Pacific Coast League began their push. They wanted to gain major league status. They wanted to become the 3rd major league. When Ford Frick became the commissioner, he set down guidelines for classifications. And he laid out what the Coast League had to accomplish to be able to gain major league status. And the biggest issue they had was the quality of their ballparks. Only Wrigley Field in LA, where the Angels played, was of major league caliber. None of the other clubs had major league caliber ballparks. Well, in 53, Bob Cobb was invited by the chief of police to come up to the police academy up in the hills. And they were they wanted to put in a kitchen and develop a catering operation, and they wanted Cobb's help on a consulting basis. Well, when he got up there and got walking around, he was really impressed with the area. And a day or two later, he went back up with a friend of his, Bill Schroeder, and they looked it over, and Cobb said, this is the place. This is the perfect place for a ballpark. And what he was talking about was Chavez Ravine. And he engaged Stiles Clements, a leading architect of the day, and they designed a ballpark, and all the papers called it super modern. It had 2 restaurants. It had a cocktail lounge, had child care, escalators from the parking areas up to the box offices. And it had what they called cabanas, but today we all know them as suites, skyboxes. And the whole concept of this ballpark was decades ahead of anybody else's thoughts on a stadium in the game. They went to the mayor and were kind of put off by it. Cobb felt that if they would just give him the land, that he could raise the money, and he proposed a 25,000 seat ballpark with the ability to expand it to 45 or 50 when the day came and either the Coast League got major league status or a major league team relocated. And he just wasn't getting any government cooperation or interest. And ultimately, when the A's left Philadelphia for Kansas City, some of the columnists in the LA Times really skewered the mayor. And the mayor held a press conference and basically held up Cobb's brochure. And he said, I have a plan. We're going to do a ballpark in Chavez Ravine. And he had basically stolen Cobb's plan. But when Walter O'Malley made his first fact-finding visit to Los Angeles in 1957, he told the city leaders he wasn't going to meet with any of them until he met first with Bob Cobb. And they spent a couple of hours in Mr. O'Malley's suite at the Stadler Hilton. And he had Cobb bring with him his plans for the ballpark. And he laid it all out in front of him and told him the whats and whys and how comes. And O'Malley was extremely impressed, so much so that there were members of the city council that felt the Dodgers should just play at Wrigley Field, and others who felt they needed to do some renovation work on the Coliseum and the Dodgers should make that their home. Well, those were not options for Walter O'Malley. Wrigley was not going to happen. And he pointed out there were no box seats. The dimensions were all wrong. And the Coliseum was a short-term solution while construction was undergoing on a ballpark, but it was not a long-term home for the Dodgers. And ultimately the city relented and did the deal. And so to this day, Chavez Ravine is the home of Major League Baseball. And that concept initially came from Bob Cobb. So when the Dodgers came to LA, the Giants to San Francisco, following the 57 season, the Coast League teams had to vacate. The Dodgers assumed ownership and control of the Angels and took them to Spokane. And ultimately, the Hollywood Stars were sold to a group in Salt Lake City. There was a group in Long Beach led by a city councilman who tried to expand a ballpark they were building at that time, which is today Blair Field. They felt like those plans could easily be modified and they could make it into a park to house a Pacific Coast League club. And that went a long way, but ultimately the Coast League was changing. Oakland had moved to Vancouver. You had teams in Seattle and Portland and now Spokane. So the base of power in the Coast League was in the Northwest. And they were tired of having all the long travel for so many years, and they wanted to draw teams up into their area. They wanted that team to be in Salt Lake City, not in Long Beach. And it was such a contentious issue that Ralph Kiner was running the San Diego Padres at that time. And he said, if you take Hollywood, if you don't put them in Long Beach, I'm taking my ball club and we're going to move into the Texas League. Now, he didn't do it, but Cobb also looked at Phoenix, but Horace Stoneham trumped him on that and got that territory. And ultimately, Cobb sold the club, and the Hollywood Stars ended up moving to Salt Lake City. Cobb supported the Dodgers when they won their first pennant. He took out a full-page ad on behalf of the Brown Derby to congratulate them. He organized buses. A lot of people thought, he was negative about it, that he was bitter, but he wasn't. He organized shuttle buses from his restaurant to the Coliseum, and he had box seats for Dodger games. But ultimately, when the Angels came about, he was very close with Gene Autry. Autry was an original investor in the Hollywood Stars as well. They were quite close. Autry hired Paul Fred Haney as his manager, and Fred Haney as his general manager, and Fred Haney had been manager of the Hollywood Stars. He and Cobb were very, very close. And so Cobb's allegiance, his big league allegiance, shifted to the Angels. His grandson told me that Cobb's wife had a hard and fast rule for the Cobb household, that there were two words that were never to be spoken in their home, and that was Walter O'Malley. And I pressed him because I wanted to know if that was because of a problem. And he said, I never heard my grandfather utter a negative word about Mr. O'Malley. I think it all came from my grandmother, and that fun of the Hollywood Stars was stopped because Mr. O'Malley brought the Dodgers into Los Angeles. So it's just an organization that I think brought a lot to baseball. It was a very special time. My wife and I laughed the other night. We were saying, you know, if you could go back in time, where would you want to go? And I said, I think I want to go to a bat day at Gilmore Field so that I can get a bat handed to me by Barbara Stanwyck. But that's just my my form of baseball. But I want to throw out a trivia question for you guys, and I'm certainly willing to offer a book to the winner. If anybody can get it, I'll start off and I'll give some additional clues until we have a winner.
Dan, that'll be an inscribed book by the author, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. If it doesn't diminish the value, of course. But can anybody tell me for the 1957 season, their final season in Southern California, who the chairman of the board of the Hollywood Stars was?
If someone knows the answer, electronically send me a hand raise and I'll unmute you. No hand raises, Dan.
Okay, I'm going to give you a hint. He is in the Baseball Hall of Fame.
The board.
None yet.
Okay, St. Louis Cardinals.
Bush. Augie Bush.
No. Okay, one more hint. Brooklyn Dodgers.
Nothing.
Hint number five. Jackie Robinson.
Oh, we got Chris Moyer. Here we go.
How about Branch Rickey?
There you go. And a little background on that, Chris, and to the rest of you. In 1949, when Fred Haney became manager of the Hollywood Stars, he insisted that they have a really good big league tie-up. They had been tied up with the Browns, the White Sox, and those things all benefited the big league club, and they just 4, 5, 6 players at most. And so Haney worked with Branch Rickey Jr. and Branch on a deal, and they got a lot of players, and he insisted they had to be young players, prospects, and they had to be fast. He wasn't going to take down end of the game, end of the career veterans. Cobb didn't want to do it. He'd heard horror stories about Rickey from other executives in the Coast League, and he was really, really wary. And ultimately, they became great friends. They became fishing buddies. Cobb was a big outdoorsman. He competed in the national skeet and trap shooting competitions. And he and Rickey ended up, doing deep sea fishing trips and hunting trips, and became the best of friends, to the point where others in the Coast League would mock him and say that, he would do anything that Branch Rickey suggests. But it got to the point when Rickey was pushed out by the Pirates that Cobb got him involved with the Stars. Rickey became a minority investor, and then for the 57 season, they made him the chairman of the board of the Hollywood Stars. So, Chris, I'll be sure to get that to you. I expect to have my copies here in the next couple of weeks.
Dan, I think it took us five hints because we're here to learn, Dan. We don't have the answers. Although speaking as collectively as SABR groups, I'm very disappointed in all of this. No, I'm just kidding.
But I'm wide open for your thoughts, your comments, and any questions you may have.
Well, I've got a couple, if I may.
Great.
Yes.
Sure. We just got some people with their hand raised, but go ahead, Paul.
Okay. I was making some notes as you went here. You mentioned that the Hollywood Stars had televised a game in 1940, which surprised me to some extent because, that was so far ahead of their time. Televisions didn't become really available in large numbers until after World War II. But there's a famous photograph of from I think 1938 to 39 at Ebbets Field, where in Brooklyn, where Red Barber is speaking in front of the television. It's actually
September 1939. Yeah, Brooklyn was the first. Yeah,
it looks like a cardboard box with a couple of circles cut out, and that was the television camera. But the Hollywood Stars in televising 1940 must have been ahead of just about every other major league team.
Brooklyn in September of 1939 was the first, and then about a week or two later, the Giants televised a game on another New York station. And yes, then Hollywood, there's pictures of the pregame show, their manager, Bill Sweeney, signing on opening day, 1940. And I've got a picture in the book of the first little set. It was a big set in the Brown Derby where people were able to watch. And down in Long Beach, there was a department store that had one of these early sets in the window. And when the game came on, such a large crowd gathered that it actually spilled out into the street and blocked traffic, and the police had to come and disperse everybody. But as I said, there were only 300 sets in Los Angeles at that time. It was an experimental channel, which today is Channel 9 in LA, and they were way ahead of the game.
Very nice. A couple other notes I made here. You mentioned the Denver Bears and George Genovese. Well, the Stars, and I'm not probably getting this right, but the Stars wouldn't have any competition from the Denver Bears because for quite a while, because there was no professional baseball in Denver from 1933 to 1947. The Denver Bears played through 32 and then stopped because of the Depression and did not resume until 1948. So there was a huge gap of professional baseball here in Denver. But and what was the connection with George Genovese?
Well, I wrote George's autobiography, and George had actually come up through the Cardinals organization and got frustrated after the war. He felt like they were all trying. He was Dan Evans knows him well. He was 5'6", 5'7", and felt like the Cardinals were constantly trying to find the next Marty Marion, and all these big, tall shortstops were challenging him for playing time, and he would end up beating them out. But he got frustrated that he wasn't moving up, and so the Cardinals sold him or loaned him, I can't recall which, to Denver. Danny Menendez was running the Denver club there in 48. And so George played at Denver in 48, and then Hollywood had, as part of their connection with the club, had right of first refusal on any player they wanted. And it was late in the season, I want to say late August, early September, and they exercised that right and bought George. And George told me the story, I've got it in the book, that the day he arrived, he was unpacking his gear in the clubhouse there in Gilmore Field, and the board of directors had just fired Jimmy Dykes as the manager. And Jimmy Dykes comes walking in the clubhouse and sees George unpacking his things and said, kid, if you'd have gotten here a little sooner, you might have saved my job.
Very good. Alex, why don't you, go ahead and start calling on people with questions.
Yep. We have Dave Barry with a question.
Mute myself here. Dan, this is Dave Barry. I have a question. Any great stories about the late, great Bobby Bragan and the Hollywood Stars?
I'm going to go with a yes on that. Yes.
Oh, I speak to his daughter from time to time, and yeah, there's a couple of funny stories on Bobby Bragan. They didn't want him, and this was really the first sign of the shift in terms of the influence of Branch Rickey on the Hollywood Stars. Bob Cobb, he loved to hire managers who had personality and who were very popular with the media. So Bill Sweeney and Charlie Root and Fred Haney, and he deferred to Rickey. The Pirates were the parent club at that time, and so he deferred to Rickey for the 53 season, and Rickey assigned Bobby Bragan, who had been at Fort Worth the year before. And the fans were not happy about it. They he was not real personable, and they didn't like him. There were a lot of stories in the various LA papers about this, that the fans didn't like Bragan. And so it was probably about May, and Bragan started to go a little over the top. I mean, he got thrown out of a game and did a strip tease. He was a player manager, and he caught. So he flung each piece of equipment out of the dugout one by one, and got fined for that by the league. There was another game where he laid down at home plate during an argument with an umpire, sipping a little carton of orange drink, laying down at home plate. And so he incurred the wrath of the league. Well, after the first of these escapades, when he got home, his wife asked him what in the world he was doing. And he just shrugged his shoulders and said, when in Rome, do as the Romans. And he said, they expect a show, and I've got to put on a show for these people. But he was an interesting guy. The players really, really liked him a lot. After games, he would retreat to Bob Cobb's office there in the ballpark. There was a large piano, and he would calm himself down. As he said, I need to soothe the soul, and he would play the piano after games. And he came from a musical family. So, yeah, he was an interesting guy. And one night after a particular loss, he made a move that backfired on him. And when he came home, there was a note on the kitchen table from his wife that just said, "Your beans and weenies are in the stove. I've gone to bed. How could you have pinch hit this guy?" But yeah, he is an interesting character and ultimately became a very beloved figure with the Hollywood Stars. Thanks
Was
for
he was he the manager in '53 when they won the PCL championship?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Haney went to Pittsburgh, and then ultimately when Haney was fired in Pittsburgh, he replaced Haney in Pittsburgh as well.
Great.
Haney, that name sounds so familiar. Does Haney have anything to do with Cincinnati at any point?
No, Fred Haney played with Detroit. He was a high school sports legend in LA. He was the later, he went to Pittsburgh as the manager. Awful ball clubs, just terrible ball clubs there in the 50s in Pittsburgh. But he ultimately became the manager with the Milwaukee Braves, and in '57 and '58 led them to the World Series. They beat the Yankees in the '57 World Series.
We have someone on the call here who was in the Braves organization. Herb Shankman, wave your hand. Herbie, there he is. Herb was in the minor league system, originally signed with Boston, and by the time he got out of the Army, worked his way up through the minor league system. He got called up to the Braves, the parent club, and never got in a game. But we do have a Milwaukee connection here.
That's great.
Alex.
I thought there was another one, Paul, for hand raise, but there isn't at this time. So,
okay. Well, Dan,
nope, my apologies. We just got one popped up. Chris Moyer.
Chris Moyer.
Yeah, can you describe the open classification of the Pacific Coast League? I guess that was as you were describing it earlier, it was sort of like like an early way to determine whether they can start expansion out west and whether those teams could be viable teams down the road?
Right, Chris. What they did was baseball created an additional classification. They deemed it open because the big issue that the Coast League was fighting, it was not just gaining major league status, but they were really angry at the draft rules. They would go out and sign these young prospects that would take 3, 4, 5 years to develop. It might take 3 years to develop, then they'd get them for a year or two, and then they'd be lost to the draft, the minor league draft. And I believe off the top of my head, I think the fee was, I can't recall if it was $5,000 or $10,000. And the clubs were just furious that they could have sold players. For instance, Hollywood developed a young pitcher, Eddie Erat, and they sold him to Cincinnati for $65,000 in 1946. But had they not done that deal, and he had been with them another year, he would have been subject to the draft, and they would have only gotten either $5,000 or $10,000. So the teams were arguing against this and trying to fight this. And one of the things, the president of the Hollywood Stars through their first 10, 12 years was a local attorney, Victor Ford Collins. And he hit on the solution: 2 contracts, a white contract and a yellow contract. And they left it up to the player. And the player could sign the white contract if he wanted to ultimately be draft eligible, and a yellow contract if he did not. And the first year, I think there were 18 players that fit the category in the league, and only 2 signed the white contract to be draft eligible. And so as part of this, baseball, I don't know if I want to call it appeasement or a solution, they created an additional classification that was between the big leagues and the highest level of the minor leagues, and that was open classification. And that's what they plugged Hollywood, put the Coast League into, because the Coast League was threatening to just simply go outlaw. And
so I'm sorry, were they so all the teams were unaffiliated with major league teams at that time?
Well, that was another bone of contention, because that was their goal. And in the winter of 48, 49, the teams had all agreed to it. And then all of a sudden, Hollywood signs with the Brooklyn Dodgers. And the rest of 6 of the other 8 teams were furious about that. And Hollywood said, well, wait a minute. Don't yell at us. The Angels are owned by Wrigley, who owned the Cubs. and they were clearly a Cubs minor league team. So yeah, it was a delicate situation, and they showed that they actually had papers drawn with Ricky and the Dodgers before the vote had been taken, and that's how they got around it. But yeah, that was how that all played out.
All right, thank you.
You bet, anytime.
Paul, we have Kurt Wells with his hand raised.
Okay. Our vice president.
I just correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, but wasn't Bob Cobb the one that the Cobb salad is named after?
There you go. You know, I realized I neglected to follow up my point, how he had touched everybody's lives, and we don't even know it. Not only did Bob own and operate the Brown Derby, but he created the Cobb salad, and that's how he touched many of our lives, and we didn't even realize that. But he did.
I remember looking that up one time, wondering if was Ty Cobb had any connection to that, and seeing that it was Bob Cobb. There was baseball related.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the fun treats of this, I've gotten to know his grandson well, and he's invited me, once California comes out of this lockdown, he's invited me to his home in Southern California for a Cobb salad dinner, and I can't wait.
Nice.
Alex, Marlene,
we have a question in the chat room, Dan. I don't know if this has been touched on, but Mr. Dan Evans is asking if you can talk a bit about one of the mentors, George Genovese, a little bit more.
Well, I think his time in Hollywood, you know, it's interesting because George was in Hollywood in '49. And then at the end of that season, he was selected by the Washington Senators in the Rule 5 draft. He was a shortstop. And Irv Noren was also snapped up. He was the MVP of the Coast League that year, and he was also snapped up by Washington, and they were roommates. And in May, George got frustrated at not playing. You know, he's a competitor. And he told me many times he felt it was one of the biggest mistakes of his life, but he just walked into the manager's office, Harris, and just Bucky Harris, and said, I don't want to be here anymore. I want to go back to Hollywood. And they sent him back to talk with ownership, Mr. Griffith, and they farmed him out to Chattanooga for the rest of the season. And then the next year, Hollywood was in need of a shortstop, and George called Fred Haney, and Haney made a deal to bring him back. And George often said that was one of his biggest regrets, that he didn't just, you know, stick it out and stay in the big leagues. But what it did is it put him in with Hollywood for the '51 season when the Pittsburgh Pirates took over. And Branch Rickey had seen him. And so Pittsburgh grabbed him in the Rule 5 draft that winter. And when he joined the Pirate organization, he actually was sent to New Orleans. He was going to be a player coach under Danny Murtaugh in New Orleans. And the first day of spring training, Rickey was there and called him in and said, listen, you've lost a step. I don't see you getting back to the big leagues, but what I do see for you is a career as a manager. And so George agreed. He became a manager at Batavia in the New York Penn League, another Rob Manfred decision. Don't get me going. But anyway.
Easy.
Yeah. Got to get my some blood pressure medicine here. So George took on a managing career, but Branch Rickey would call on him for special assignments. He would send him up into Canada to look at a player. He hired him to manage the San Juan Senators in winter ball, to watch Roberto Clemente and provide reports on Roberto Clemente before the draft that year. And so he became a real trusted confidant of Branch Rickey. Rickey would bring him into Pittsburgh at the end of the season to work with George Sisler on tryout camps. And he would send him to Mexico with Howie Hake and Clyde Sukeforth to look at players and run tryout camps. And I talked to Branch Rickey III a couple of years ago and introduced myself to him. And he said, you know, he was very special to our family, and that's why I've made a point to stay in touch with him all these years. But George was a Rickey disciple. In fact, a kind of a funny side story at the SABR convention in Miami. What was that, 2016? You probably remember 15. You remember they had the big panel discussion with Jack McKeon and Mike Hill and several members of the Marlins. And I went over and introduced myself. I guess I talked to Jack McKeon when I was working on the Genovese book, and he was really, really very kind, very helpful. I went over and introduced myself to him. And in '54, George was managing Hutchinson, Kansas. And he was fired. Dick Wagner, who later ran the Cincinnati Reds, fired him. And it was because George had banned the players from going to a certain bar that was owned by one of the owners of the ball club. So the guy got revenge and got George fired. Anyway, Ricky told George to hold on. He had another assignment for him just to wait a few days. And during that time, Jack McKeon showed up to play for the ball club. He was a catcher. And so when I talked to Jack there in Miami, he said, you know, I thought I was being sent there to replace him. And I said, you know, George did too. And he just lit up. He said, did he really? He really thought I was going to start my managing career there? I was going to replace him? And I said, that's what he told me. And it wasn't. It was another guy, Larry Dorton, who took over the ball club. But George became a real disciple of Branch Rickey. And when I was working on the book, I talked to a scout who had been a longtime Pirates scout and asked him about what he looked for in a player. And he said, I look for blessings. You know, the plus power is a blessing. A plus throwing arm is a blessing. Plus running speed is a blessing. And he said, I look for blessings. And I repeated that story to George. It was Lenny Yoakum who I talked to down in New Orleans. And I repeated that story to George, and he just smiled and said, that's Mr. Rickey talking. And that, you know, that really carried with George, the tenets of Branch Rickey. And I think George, not only in my mind, the greatest scout of all time, but he had an amazing ability to see talent where nobody else did. He could project players that were just unprojectable, guys that were playing semi-pro games and not on school teams. And, you know, he didn't see these guys over 3 years of high school varsity or 3 years of college play. So a lot of that there's a lot of natural skill there, but a lot of that came from Branch Rickey.
I just want to throw in something with, you mentioned Branch Rickey III, who has a Colorado connection. Of course, he's the president of the PCL now, I believe.
No more. He quit.
And
yeah.
That's why we're updating this here. Yes. But for many years, the PCL's headquarters were here in Colorado Springs, in Chris Moyer's town. And Branch Rickey III was the keynote speaker at our very first Rocky Mountain SABR banquet in 1998. He came up in Colorado Springs and regaled us. So
that's great. That's great.
And Kurt, maybe you can help me out with this, but there's also some Colorado Rockies connections with the McKeon family.
Yes, the McKeons and Michael Hill. Of course, yeah. Michael Hill used to be in the Rockies organization, and Jack McKeon himself was a manager for with the Denver Bears, I believe, wasn't he? And definitely had Denver roots through the Bears system.
And Jack's son is scouted for the Rockies.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Do we have any other questions?
Paul, can I just say something?
Yes, of course.
Dan mentioned George Genovese, who I agree, I think is the greatest scout in the history of the game. He's a personal mentor of mine. I actually gave one of the eulogies at his service. Would love to share with some of you how great this guy was, and read Dan's book about George, because it's spectacular. One year he had 9 players on the field to start a game that he had signed every one of them, and 1/3 of the all-stars for the National League. He had Bobby Bonds, Jack Clark, Rob Deere, George Foster, Chili Davis, Dave Kingman, Gary Maddox, Gary Matthews, Randy Moffett, Matt Noakes, Matt Williams. And I took George to a game one year, and he liked this sophomore at Notre Dame High School in California who's going to go play football, some guy named Mike Stanton. And nobody in the room had seen him, and everybody said, you know, George, what do you think? And George said, I'm going to tell you in 2 years, he's going to be the guy we want to take. Well, the Dodgers didn't take him, and I think Mr. Stanton turned out to be a pretty good player. An incredible man. Read Dan's book about George Genovese. He is for me the greatest scout ever. In fact, when we started the Scouts Foundation, we named the Lifetime Achievement Award after George Genovese. That's where he stands in the baseball community.
That's kind of you to say, Dan. Thank you very much. I want to pick up on one of your points, if you guys don't mind, and share a funny story. And to kind of correct Dan, it was actually 7 of the 9 players during a game in San Diego were guys that he signed. And there were only 2 that he did not sign. Well, the second baseman, Tito Fuentes, and the shortstop, Chris Spire. Now, Tito had played for George in the minor leagues when he managed the Giants system at El Paso, and he was signed by George's brother, Chick, who was the Giants' Latin American scouting supervisor and was involved in the Marichal and the Alou signings. And then Spire, George and I had a lot of fun with this because Spire was actually out of George's territory. He was at UC Santa Barbara. And I asked George about this. I said, George, did you ever get up and see him? And he said, well, no. He said, by the time I got up there, he'd had an appendectomy and was out for the rest of the season. So I never saw him. Now, what happened on that was the Giants scouting and farm system director, Jack Schwartz. There was a guy here in Fresno, Glenn Wright, Shotgun Wright, who was a great shortstop for the Pittsburgh Pirates. He was on their 27 World Series team. And Glenn Wright was scouting in this area for the Boston Red Sox. And Jack was down here. We had the Giants Single A club at the time. And Jack connected with Glenn Wright. Well, the Red Sox had the first pick. The Giants had the second pick in this particular January draft. And so Jack is trying to pump Glenn for what the Red Sox are thinking. And he's shocked because Glenn Wright says, well, we're either going to take Rick Burleson or Chris Spire. Now, Jack had seen George's reports on Burleson, but he knew nothing about Spire. So he runs back to the office and he sends telegrams to every Giant scout in North America and says, can anybody tell me anything about Chris Spire? And their guy in Illinois had gone up and scouted the Canadian Summer League and saw him. And so he sent a report. And based on that, the Giants took Spire with the second pick in that January draft. So I would tease George, I said, well, the 8th player, Fuentes, was technically a Genovese sign. And if you'd gotten off your lazy ass and gotten up to Santa Barbara, you'd have had all 9. And George would laugh.
That's great. Very, very good.
Thanks, Dan. Alex,
do we have anybody else?
We just have a question from one of our members, Shannon Blair. Dan, she wants to say thank you for your coming to our luncheon. It's very interesting. Is there a way to order your book with an autograph? It would be an honor.
Wow.
How about you do it through me? Could we do that through me?
Okay. Yeah, we'll figure it out. Yeah. Paul, we'll figure it out. That'd be great.
I know Shannon. I see Shannon around. We can figure that out, Shannon.
Great. Thank you.
I don't believe there is anything more.
Alex, thanks for your help there, and Paul for the invitation, and all of you guys for listening. I enjoyed this a bunch. This was fun.
I believe you'll be welcome to stick around if you want to.
Love to.
Paul?
Yeah, okay. We are, Dan, Mr. Taylor, thank you so much. That was terrific. And I can't wait to get my inscribed copy myself. You made it so intriguing. And I hope Marlene, as a West Coast person, enjoyed the historical aspects of this discussion. So thank you so much. We're going to just open it up. Anybody have anything on any topic not named in Nolan Arenado? No, I'm just kidding. We can actually do Nolan Arenado.
Looks like we have a last minute hand raise from Chris Moyer. I don't know if he has a question for Dan, but
Chris Moyer, okay.
Yeah, actually, it's sort of a current era question for Dan Taylor. With Fresno now being a Rockies low A affiliate, how was the transition for people there in Fresno regarding the change from the AAA ranks down to the low A West League?
It hasn't gone over well. I mean, I'm part of the television team out here, and so yeah, a lot of people approach me about it, and yeah, there's a lot of frustration, a lot of disappointment. I'm sure once play begins and the fans are able to come back, they'll get over it. It's, baseball's such a wonderful night. But I think as we get players in and they get promoted and publicized, and we all learn more about who the Rockies are sending our way and who the manager is going to be, and the personalities become more a part of everything, they'll get over it. But it's been a huge, huge disappointment. I'm amazed, because this community puts so much heart and soul into trying to become a AAA community. And yeah, there's been issues through the years. That happens. Every community has certain issues, but to lose that spot of the Pacific Coast League, to no longer be a AAA club, yeah, there's a lot of disappointment
here. Dan,
yeah,
sorry, go ahead, Chris.
No, I'm just saying we sort of know the feeling with that with Colorado Springs and
true.
the Rockies
Very
too.
true. Yeah.
So we know that we've known that.
Well, and it's a bit of a double whammy for our ownership group, the Bakers, because they own the club in Grand Junction, and they're very involved with their business in Denver, and so with the Pioneer League being no more, and in terms of affiliated baseball, why they're out there as well. Right. So I really feel badly for them.
I thought that the Montfort family owned the Grand Junction team.
The Bakers had. Pardon?
Partial.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if I could piggyback on that comment, Fresno's halfway between LA and San Francisco, literally. And so everybody in Fresno is either a Giant fan or a Dodger fan. And I think the Rockies are coming into a situation where, nobody really gives a damn about the Rockies in Fresno. That's Giant and Dodger territory, and that's going to be a tough hurdle for the franchise.
It will. I mean, it was a gold mine when they were tied into the Giants, especially through their World Series years. It was easy marketing for the front office to capitalize on that. But one of the things I look at it, and in my perspective, Dan, the ins and outs of this far more than I ever will. But I look at that. We've got 5 big league clubs in the state of California. We had 2 Coast League clubs in the state of California, and here 4 of the. You've got the Dodgers in Oklahoma City. You've got the Angels in Salt Lake City. You've got the Padres in El Paso, Texas, and so it was a tough. And then for time, you had the A's in Nashville. So
Dan Taylor, I thought that was interesting that they bumped the California League from high A to low A. For me personally, and looking at from a geographic perspective, all the minor league systems and leagues, it would have made more sense geographically to bump them up to AA. Because to your point,
that's a good point. Yeah,
there's so many major league franchises there with history and a strong fan base. It just made to get a AA league west of the. I don't know if this is true, but west of the Mississippi, I thought would be more advantageous. But I guess not. Your thoughts?
It is a great thought, and I remember years ago when Joe Gallardi was running the California League, and he wanted to try to bump the California League up to AA, and that didn't fly. But I certainly like that idea a lot. I've asked people, and I've gotten different answers on why they shifted the Northwest League with its early season weather issues, and chose to make that a high A league, and this a low A league. And what I'm told is the players coming out of Arizona, where they would be playing short season ball, would transition easier weather-wise and everything else playing in California. But the quality of the facilities here, I think, is much greater than what you have up in the Northwest. And so I'm a little mystified by that, but I'm mystified by a lot of things about the game these days.
Mm-hmm. So Dan Taylor, and I should have done this with the intro, but could you briefly tell us about your career in baseball and what are you doing right now? And
well, my background, I spent 30 years as a television sports anchor here in Fresno. My start announcing was as the PA announcer for the single A club here in town when I was a high school senior. So I've been around the club a lot. I now work in the corporate PR world for a company that manufactures fitness equipment. In fact, we're in the weight rooms of all the big league clubs. So I deal with the strength coaches for all the big league clubs. And I have certainly developed this unbelievable passion for writing. So I contribute to SABR's biography project. And what I've tried to do is focus on George's guys. to kind of keep that legacy alive. And I'm in the middle of my next book, which will be out in late summer, early fall of 2022.
And are you behind the mic right now? Are you doing any play-by-play right now?
I haven't heard anything from the club of their plans. Fresno was the last to, because of some issues with the lease and monies owed the city. They were the last club to sign the NDA, and then ultimately they were one of the last two clubs that last week to sign the new agreement. And so they have a lot to get working on with the club. So I talked to the radio broadcaster, Doug Greenwald, a lot, and neither of us have heard anything. So we don't know what to expect for the coming season.
Gosh, it's an upside down world we live in.
It is.
Paul, we have Dave Barry with a follow-up question, if that's okay.
Yes.
Great.
Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, one more question, Dan, on your book. Will that be sold on Amazon or?
It's available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and at the publisher's website, all for pre-order right now. It's up, and they're taking pre-orders, and March 10th is the date that everything goes hot.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Anything else, Alex?
Nope. I think it's an open forum if you want that, Paul.
Okay. Yes.
Oh, Kurt Wells just raised his hand. Go ahead, Kurt.
Well, I've got an open forum question, and this is for Dan Evans, relating back to Paul's question about the Rockies. I know you still do look over analytics quite a bit. What's your thoughts on both CJ Cron and Greg Bird?
Well, I'm biased on CJ Cron because I've known him since he was born. His dad was somebody I signed and played with the White Sox. I think he's a superior player to the other two options. He's going to strike out a bit, but he's got some real good, he's got extreme power. He's got 80 power, and he's got 80 makeup. He's a really good player. I thought it was a good signing, Kurt. I really did. I think he's a huge step up from Fuentes offensively. And I think it'll give them an opportunity to platoon Bird and Cron and let Fuentes do what he really should be doing, which is a subordinate player. Bird's a good player. He's never been given a chance to play every day. And I think it's partially because he's got some holes, but I think in a platoon with he and Cron, it could be okay. Not bad. I mean, a team that is so bad offensively, a platoon sometimes is the best way to overcome their situation.
I think from what I was reading that Bird hasn't really played a lot because he has had significant injuries 5 years in a row.
Yeah,
he's been special at times. When he's healthy, he's had some moments.
Yeah.
And I think that's one reason, Paul, that he's a better platoon candidate than counting on him to play 140 games, because I don't think his body can do it. I never thought it could. So I think he's better suited to a platoon environment.
Kind of like another version of David Dahl in a way, not to knock these guys, but it's tough to stay healthy sometimes, All right. Kurt, was that?
Yeah, that's all I had. Thank you. Appreciate it, Dan.
Anybody else?
Bartolo Colon signed this morning.
I saw that in Mexico.
47 years old, throwing ground balls south of the border.
No. Bartolo just turned 70. Yes. Or 80. Oh, he just turned 80. I'm sorry.
I was at the game. He homered in San Diego, and I thought there was going to be cardiac arrest in the entire scouting box.
The oldest man in history to hit his first home run, right?
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
I'm starting to think he truly is immortal.
Amazing.
Unreal. Well, I want to thank Dan Evans. And I also want to thank Dan Taylor and for joining us today. It was really very interesting and entertaining. And if you want to join us anytime for one of these, it'd be great. We look forward to the release of your book. And so for everybody else, whatever you do, don't mention the name Rob Manfred to Dan Taylor. I guess that's a lesson we learned today. Okay. So if Kurt Wells and Dan Evans would stay on for a couple of minutes, Otherwise, thank you all so much for joining us today. Remember to put your submit your predictions to my email. It's everybody knows my email. It's ptparker777@gmail.com. And everybody be safe and be well and go get vaccinated. Okay, if you haven't already. Okay.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Paul, 2 questions. 1, do you want me to make you the host? I'm currently the host because if I leave, it gets cut off. And 2, do you want me to stop recording?
Yes, stop recording, but this is only going to take a couple of minutes.
Okay.
With Dan and Kurt.
Okay, bye.